Ryan Holiday is without a doubt one of my favorite living authors, and he is someone that I greatly respect and whose books have had a tremendous impact on my life. I go into every single one of his new books just fully expecting it to be a 5-star, and it almost always is. Recently, though, I picked up the newest book in his Stoic Virtues series called Right Thing, Right Now, and this book, far from being a 5-star, was a 3-star, and I want to tell you guys why. So this series, if you're unfamiliar with it, it started with Courage is Calling, Discipline is Destiny, and then Right Thing, Right Now. This is book 3. This is going through what the Stoics called the cardinal virtues, which is courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. And Courage is Calling, Discipline is Destiny, I absolutely adored these books. They were just pinnacle of Ryan Holiday to me. They're just short, pithy. I loved even the actual physical size of these and everything. I love everything about these books. And I just dog-eared the ever-loving heck out of them, just page after page after page of things that I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so good, right? And one of the constant themes of how Ryan writes is when he's talking about Christianity, he will bring a focus on Christian morals without maintaining a focus on Christian spirituality, right? And so he will bring the principles of Christianity that align with other systems of religion or other systems of philosophy or anything like that, and he'll use them to reinforce his points. And so he's never writing anything that's explicitly Christian, and he's definitely never writing anything that is explicitly talking about the spirituality side of Christianity. And for these first 2 books, that really did not bother me at all. In this book, however, I ran into some serious issues. And it started out right at the very beginning, just in his introduction. And he has this part where he says, so he's quoting a guy named Hyman Rickover, and Hyman had said, "Life is not meaningless for the man who considers certain actions wrong simply because they are wrong, whether or not they violate the law. This kind of moral code gives a person a focus, a basis on which to conduct himself." And then Ryan says, "That kind of code is what this book is about. There will be no complicated legalism or clever witticisms. We will not explore the biological or metaphysical roots of right and wrong. While we will consider the profound moral dilemmas of life, the purpose will be to cut through them, as the human beings who lived through them had to do, not bog you down with hopeless abstractions. There will be no grand theory of the law here, nor will there be any offers of heaven or hell, or threats of hell. The aim in this book is much simpler, much more practical, following in the tradition of the ancients who saw justice as a habit or a craft, a way of living." Immediately, I was like, that doesn't work, dude. You can't do that. You can't write a book about right or wrong, but not bring in any kind of discussion about where right and wrong comes from and what decides right or wrong. So one of the things that's really stuck out to me was okay, this seems contradictory. Why was I okay with the way that Ryan writes for these 2 books, but then really not okay with it in this book about justice? I was fine with courage and temperance and this whole way of writing that takes Christian morality, but doesn't continue in the vein of the Christian spirituality side of things, right? And the reason why is because these 2 books, the focus of them is very personal, is very subjective. So courage is something that is not a universal thing. What's a brave thing for me to do may not be something that's brave for you to do, right? If I have a fear of heights, then it takes courage for me to go up and stand up on a really high thing. If you don't have a fear of heights, then it doesn't take any courage for you to do it, right? And the same thing with discipline. It doesn't take discipline for me to wake up early and read. I love reading. I love waking up early, so I just wake up early and read. But for you, it might take a ton of discipline to wake up at 5 a.m. and read, right? So both of these virtues are very internal, subjective, personal things that are not universally applicable values, right? And Ryan even points this out in the book. In the very beginning, he talks about how the Stoics would point out that we have discretion, which moderates bravery, and that we have pleasure, which gives us relief from excessive self-control, but justice has no opposite virtue. It has no balancing virtue, right? There's just justice or injustice, right? And so even from that, we gain this understanding that justice is a totally different thing. And the reason it's a totally different thing is because it comes into more of a universal truth. And so in order to talk about justice, we have to start talking about universals, right? Because what's brave for me may not be brave for you, but what's right for me as in a whole just world and the justice of human nature, what's right for me has to be what's right for you. Like justice can't change depending on who we're talking to about it. It has to be something that is objectively right. So right from the get-go, I'm like, man, I don't think I agree with this. And there's three distinct areas that I want to talk about, and I have a couple of quotes for both of them. But the reason why you run into problems when you take this approach of setting aside the Christian spirituality side when you're talking about justice, when you're talking about overarching and objective things, okay? So the first one is in the realm of sexuality, right? And I don't have a direct quote for this from the book, but he makes a bunch of comments and he's telling a bunch of stories about people that were fighting for gay rights, or people that were fighting for gay marriage, or people that were fighting for any kind of this stuff, right? And the overarching point that I want you to get here is that when you try to talk about the objective truths of justice and you bring the Christian morals along with you, but you set aside the Christian spirituality, what you're left with is a very clear seeming idea of what is right, but no clear idea of what is wrong, and no idea of when what is right turns into wrong, right? So from a Christian worldview, if you're bringing in the Christian morality and the Christian spirituality, then what I would say is, okay, so we are called to love all people, regardless of whatever orientation that they have, but where the line of being a human being and created with a sexuality, right, from God, then that line is good and healthy and just as it extends all the way to being in a heterosexual monogamous relationship called marriage, right? And then at that point, the spirituality of Christianity says, God says everything past this is wrong. So it's very clear for me to say, okay, well, this is right and this is wrong. When we supplant God, when we take God out of that and we put ourselves in there, the problem that we run into is that we're no good at making an objective statement about when something is wrong. So in the example of sexuality, we take this idea and we say, okay, so we're supposed to love all people regardless of anything, and God made us to be sexual beings, and so this is a good and healthy thing, right? And then we extend the line, and then what happens is we extend it to a point that makes sense to us, right? So say you're fine with gay marriage, and you're like, yeah, we should support gay marriage, that's fine, right? But what becomes impossible is making the case for when does that line stop? So when does what was right become wrong? Because if we should accept a gay marriage, then why shouldn't we accept a pedophilia relationship? Or why shouldn't we accept a bestiality relationship? Or why shouldn't we accept any other relationship? If we don't have a hard line that says at this point, everything beyond this is wrong, then everything is right. But if we're trying to set ourselves up as the objective standard giver, we can make no logical argument for where that line should be drawn, okay? So the sexuality part is the first one that I want to talk about. Like, if you should accept one, then you should accept all of them. There's no logical reason that you can give from a human perspective to say, at this point, this is where we need to stop, right? So we just need to accept all of it, right? The second one that I want to talk about is he talks a lot about slavery as well as women's rights, and he talks about them in very similar ways, but we'll just take the idea of slavery. And the quote that he shares, one was a quote from Dr. Albert Schweitzer, who was talking about going and doing all this tireless work in medical clinics in Africa, and he said that we are burdened with a great debt. We are not free to confer or not confer these benefits on these people as we please. It is our duty. Anything we give them is not benevolence, but atonement. That is the foundation from which all deliberations about works of mercy must begin. And then Ryan says, denial, defiance, disavowal, this is insecurity. It's weak people, weak societies who will not try to make things right. Just as we must try to forgive those who trespass against us, we must make an active effort to seek forgiveness for the trespasses we have made. We can't pretend it didn't happen. We have to make amends. We owe it to those who've been hurt. We owe it to ourselves. Our potential is not reached by running from things, but by grappling with them, especially the difficult ones, right? And again, it's like, yes, that is true, right? But if you take that truth and you align it with the Christian morality, which it does align with the Christian morality, but you set aside the spirituality part of it, you're again left in this thing of when is enough enough, right? I never participated in any kind of slavery. My father did not participate in any kind of slavery. My grandfather did not participate in any kind of slavery. So at what point is making reparations for stuff that isn't even something that I did or my father did or my grandfather did. Like, how many generations out does this thing extend? And again, if you're honest about it in trying to make a logical answer to that from your own human perspective, you can't make a logical answer, right? If something was wrong, like slavery was 1000% wrong, right? But it's up to us to make it right and up to us to decide when it has been made right. We can't. We don't know when it has been made right. Like, how many generations of slavery were there? Well, should we do that many generations of that? When did it start? When did it end? How do you count? Is it still going? Like, it becomes absolutely impossible to define when we've gone past the point of making reparations to now we just flip the script and now we just created slavery the opposite way. Or now we just created, we did all this stuff to give women's rights, and now we just flip the script and now women are oppressing men. Like, there's no line for when this good thing becomes a bad thing, because we as humans can't be objective and make an objective judgment about ourselves because we're subjective. Okay. So the last one that I want to talk about as well is this idea of life and the sanctity of life, right? And he was talking about Cato and how Cato was super terrible and abused animals and all that. And he said, we have to care for all life forms, even though our lives are besieged by so many more personal or urgent cares, because it says something about us, because it's a legacy we will leave for the future. In fact, it may well determine whether there is a future. It should not surprise us that Cato, so uninterested in the lives of the animals he owned, was also a ruthless slave owner, which is sort of the point. The logic that says some humans are less important than others because they don't look like us, because they live far away from us, or because they're not related to us, is the same logic that says other life forms, other forms of life are less important. And again, it takes this idea that aligns with Christian morality, which is like, yes, life is sacred, right? But if you don't have the Christian spirituality to set that endpoint, right? Where God himself says, okay, all life is sacred, but human life is way more sacred because human life was made in the image of God, right? If you don't have that stopping point, then you start with this idea of, okay, life is sacred, which means we must protect life, which means we must protect all life. And you literally can't make a good ending point for that. Because if all life is sacred, then all life is sacred and you should never take any life. But if you don't take any life, you literally will die. Like, the whole thing will just come to an end because you cannot be sustained without taking the life of something. And the more you understand quantum physics and all this stuff, the more you're like, if you're just sitting over here thinking like, oh, I'm eating a vegetable because, it's like, it's still taking life. Like, everything in order to be sustained, everything that you consume to sustain your body was something that was living at one point. That's the only way that your life is sustained. So when you have the Christian spirituality behind that, it gives you this clear delineation point where you're like, okay, yes, life is sacred and life does need to be protected and it does need to be nurtured and all this. But human life is on a totally different plane than all the other life on the planet, right? And if you don't have that and you're trying to justify this and you're trying to work through all this in your own head, then you don't have a stopping point. If all life is sacred, then all life is sacred and you can't take any life ever. And if you do, that's awful and terrible. So the only thing left to do is never take any life ever, which means taking your own life because you're starving yourself and you're going to die. But then you took a life because that was your life that you took because you didn't sustain yourself. And it literally just descends into madness, right? And the whole idea is that humans are subjective beings. We cannot make objective calls about all of humanity when all of humanity are subjective people, okay? You cannot talk about the virtue of justice, which is the right thing for everybody and objective truth, without talking about something bigger than all of us. Okay? And if you do, it's just a waste of breath. It's just bleh. Like, it doesn't matter. Okay? It works. You can take Christian morality without Christian spirituality, and you can talk about courage and you can talk about discipline, because those are personal things and those are subjective things and they deal with subjective truth in me. You cannot talk about justice. You cannot talk about right and wrong in the whole world sense, and the thing that is just wrong because it is wrong. That is an objective truth. You cannot talk about objective truth without dealing with something bigger than humanity. And the whole collection of humanity is not something bigger than humanity. It's just the whole collection of humanity, right? It has to be something outside of us because we are subjective. It has to be. You cannot, any other thing is just speaking into the wind. It's just wasting all your breath, right? So I am glad I have this book. I'm like I said, I love the physicality and everything of it, and I'm quite sure that this is still going to be one of my favorite series and one that I'm going to recommend to a ton of people. And I don't hate Ryan Holiday. I'm not going to not recommend Ryan Holiday. I think he's an incredibly wise man and an incredible writer, and just I love the stuff that he's doing. But I feel like he just missed the point on this, where you cannot come right out the gate and say, oh, I'm going to write a book about justice without dealing with the overarching big picture things of what makes justice. Because if you don't have God, you have no justice. You cannot have an objective standard that is above and outside all of humanity that is generated from humanity. It doesn't work. There is no way that we ourselves can create objective standards because we are all subjective people. And so it just doesn't work. And the more you think about it, the more you will realize that it just doesn't work. So yeah, just those are the thoughts for the day. Read it, especially if you've read the rest of the series, read it, but use it as an opportunity to really ponder and really question and really push and really don't just accept, because the easy thing to do is just be like, oh yeah, I mean, like something's wrong, everybody knows that it's wrong because it's wrong, and it's like, that doesn't work. Like, if it's wrong, it's because it's wrong for a bigger reason than just everybody thinks it's wrong. Because everything that somebody thinks is wrong, there's someone somewhere who's like, oh, I think that's fine. I don't really care, right? So we are subjective creatures. And even when we all come together, we cannot get away from that. Objective things have to come from outside of humanity. And the biggest mistake that so many people make is they think that the collective of humanity ends up in something greater than humanity. And it doesn't. It just ends up in the collective of humanity. So objective truths have to come from God. If there is no God, there is no justice. If there is nothing that is bigger than humanity, then there is nothing objective about it. But most people, most intellectually honest people like Ryan, cannot argue that there is no objective thing. Something has to be objective. But I personally believe that it's kind of a cop-out, and it's a weak way of going about it to just be like, well, we don't need to worry about that thing, because that thing makes all the difference in the world. Because if the creator of those objective truths is the God of the Bible, then that leads to a very different reality and a very different truth than if it is Buddha or if it is whoever else or whatever else that you think it is, the force of evolution or whatever. Those things make a total massive difference in your life and in how you should be living your life. So don't buy into the lie that you can just kind of like, what hasn't, where the objective truth comes from is not that big of a deal. It's the biggest deal. It's the whole entire biggest deal of the whole thing. So there you go. I got a link in the description for this and the rest of these books. Highly, highly recommend them. Again, these two, absolutely amazing. This one, very good. Thought-provoking practice for forming your thoughts and not just giving in to something that seems to sound good on the surface. So, hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.